Excuse me.
So leading into Richard's talk, we wanted to do a brief summary of what we talked about last week, because it really follows on, and of course not everybody was here. I still got my microphone, I got the power. So last week, I just left this up here just to remind people, for those of you who were here, we talked about some of these post-it notes that we had put up that were related not specifically to where we saw St. Mary's going, but something about ourselves maybe that nobody knew, and developed that a little bit, and we linked it up with the theme that we've been using through the fall of telling our stories and how important it is to tell each other our stories, and that's how we can know each other better and really build community. And I used this phrase that I wrote underneath that comes from a book from Brittany Brown. And the phrase is, people are hard to, and I left it blank. She used the word hate because in the context it made sense, and it's certainly a word that could be in there, but people are hard to blank close up and so move in. Sometimes we might replace the word hate with dismiss or forget about or ignore or judge or all sorts of things you could fill that in with. But that people are hard to ignore or to dismiss close up, and so therefore move in. And that was kind of the so what of why it's important to tell each other our stories, is because that's how we can move into each other and really build our relationships and build our community. And as Tyra read beautifully in the gospel today, that's, not to be all preachy about it, because that's not my job, but that's what we're called to do. That's the purpose. When people say, oh God, what's the meaning of life? Literally, well, there it is, to learn how to love God, and love each other, and love ourselves. And so that's why it's so important. And we got to the now what, so what do you do with all of that? And how do you move in? And how do you move in not only to each other, but also to God? The first part of that great commandment, loving the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And me admitting to everybody that that's hard. It's hard to do, and I'm confident it's not just me who finds it difficult. And the question is why? Why is it so hard? And I talked a little bit about meditation and some of the things that I've been looking up. And interestingly, this week I discovered that on iTunes you can download audio meditations that you can follow. And so I haven't found the good ones yet. So there's always a lot of, the dross from the wheat, from the whatever. There's always a whole bunch of poop. And you got to find the nuggets of gold in there. So I haven't found them yet, but when I do, I'll share. But kind of suggesting that is meditation a way in? How is it different from prayer? So Richard and I were talking about moving forward from that theme of telling our stories and how that helps us to move into each other, wanting to address the question, so what about moving into God? Why is it hard? And how can we do it? So that is the tee up for where we would like to head for the next several weeks until we feel like we've exhausted everything we have that we can share with you on that.
You mean we've got to keep going until we've worked out how to move in closer to God?
Well, maybe, I don't know. So there you go.
All right, thank you. I keep coughing today. Can you hear okay at the back there?
I have great hearing.
Great, that's good. Pass it on to Graham and Walter then. So I start with an example about myself, which shows my own frailty and the kindness of my friends. So, because if you've been listening to the sermons for a little while, some of what I've been talking about is that for me, church used to be an escape and a hiding place and an oasis of peace where you could come and kind of gear yourself up to face the rest of the week. And then after a while, the country realised, well, actually, that's not really what church is about. If the only reason to come to church is to figure out how to survive the rest of the week, then, well, maybe actually need to do something about the rest of the week. Not necessarily just, not that there's anything wrong with coming to church, but it should be part of a whole, not part of a tricky bit. So they went through that whole kind of steps and process, and they were, well, what's next? And well, actually, really what I would like to learn more about is prayer, and how to pray in different ways, and how to get closer to God through prayer. So I bought a book, and it's a really good book, and I may have used this little tale before, because I've got to chapter 2, and the first 2 chapters have been very good. And one of the images that it used that I really liked was an image of a lady walking along the beach in Northumberland in England, which is big, long, sandy expanses of cold, windy beach, but beach nevertheless. And the lady walked along the beach with 3 dogs, and they were rescue dogs, all 3 of them. And 2 of the dogs would run and would play on the beach, and the third one would just run in little circles all the way, in little circles round right next to her. And after a while, they said, "Well, why does your dog only run in those little circles? Because she could go anywhere she wanted." And her answer was, "Well, it used to be a rescue dog, and it was kept in captivity in this small cage. And in that cage, all the dog could do was run in that little circle, little circle, little circle. And now, even though she's free and she's unleashed and she could go wherever she liked, well, she still runs in. She chooses now to run in those little circles." And so I was reading these 2 books, these 2 chapters, and that stopped about 3 months ago. And Mo was kind of, "Well, you're very busy," and it is true. I am busy, but actually, I have managed to read all 5 books of the Belgarian, which is some fantasy series from the 80s, which has got lots of interesting theology in it. So it's not that I haven't actually ever picked up a book in those 3 months. And yeah, I suppose mostly I read the Belgarian half a chapter at a time, and I fall asleep with it, whereas I think, well, no, this is a book about prayer, so I should be awake and at my best and ready to go. But nevertheless, so actually, in this particular case, the circumstance and the excuse is not really the excuse. And the real excuse, or the real reason, is starting to read that book about how do you get closer to God? How do you move into God? Well, actually, it's scary. Because actually, I don't know where it would lead. I don't know what it would mean about who I need to interact with, who I have relationship with, how I behave at church. What is church? And I believe truly in what we're doing here, that it's a gathered community, it's close, that we worship God together, that we try and become closer to each other and to God. But there's also a part of me that grew up in the Church of England that loves choral evensong, where you come in, you don't talk to anyone, you listen to beautiful music, you shake the vicar's hand on the way out and you go. And there's no real sense of community at all, because it's easy. It's not demanding, it's not messy, it's not complicated. Similarly, my brief experience of charismatic church, way back when I was like 15, it made me feel super uncomfortable. Why? Why is that? So, not that I'm saying I need to either go back to evensong or be charismatic, but it's just actually, it made me realise that any change is change, and I'm frightened by it. And that's why I wasn't reading the book, not because I don't have 15 minutes at the end of the day lying in bed, falling asleep to go read it. And we've all got constraints. We're busy, we're in wheelchairs, we're old, we're too young, we've got jobs, we've got children, you can name your own. I'm sure you can name 15, 20, 100 of your own excuses or constraints or reasons why you wouldn't do something, and I can for sure. The good news is, and there is good news. The good news is that there are many people in the Bible who felt like that as well. Moses, our hero of Deuteronomy, standing looking at the promised land, unfortunately not quite able to get there. How many? 120 years, still full of vigour when he died. But his first encounter with God was, no way, I'm not doing that. I can't do public speaking. I can't possibly go to the Egyptians. I can't possibly go and rescue anybody. No, I'm not doing it. And now God told him, and eventually he did, and that was what happened. And David as well, who will feature later on in this talk, who ended up as king of Israel and building temples, or not quite building temples, actually his son really built the temple. But he started out as a shepherd boy, and well, no, I can't possibly be the one to be the great hero. I'm just the youngest of 8 kids, and I'm just the guy who gets sent out to take care of the sheep. All the other, you want the other ones, the big ones, the good-looking ones, the ones who are smart. Don't choose me. But in the end, it's not about what the constraints are. It's not about whether we're the youngest or the eldest. It's about whether we are prepared to make a commitment to moving closer and not bike shedding. Have I talked about bike shedding before? I can't remember. No, you're all looking. Enough of you are looking blank that's it. Even if I have, you're going to get it again. So the bike shedding story is it comes from a nuclear power plant, where you can imagine. And I've been to a nuclear power plant at Bruce Power, actually, on Lake Huron, I think. And they are very, very, very serious people at nuclear power plants. They take their job, I'm glad, they take their job very seriously. They particularly take safety very, very seriously. And someone was telling me a story about something that happened in a nuclear power plant, and it was the main, the top group, the management group essentially of the power plant. And they were in the meeting, and there was they had some really difficult decisions to make about fuel rods running out, about how do they go and expand, about shutting down, or whatever it was, really difficult, weighty things. And then they spent an hour and a half of the 2-hour meeting discussing where they put the bike sheds for the employees who cycled into work. So and the guy came up, well, why did we spend all this time talking about bike sheds? And the answer is, it was the only thing they could face talking about. So it's so much like how you take nuclear fuel rods out, how you go and maintain the plant, how you go and figure out what happened with that safety breach last week and how you deal with it. That's really hard. Where you put the bike sheds, that's doable. That's something you can achieve. That's something you can talk about. Of course, it's nothing to do with what the real problems are, but it's something that can make you feel good. And I think it's certainly similar with me, with God, and in human relationships as well, that it's really easy to bike shed, to talk about anything other than the real issue, the hockey, how bad the sermon was, whether it's raining outside,
or inside.
Pardon? Or inside. Well, yeah, thank you. Yes, what the traffic is like. There's a ton of things we talk about to avoid talking about what's real and what is absolutely relevant to the relationship with us and with God and with other people. And then why is that? And I think there's a couple of reasons that kind of really came to mind. One of which is we don't want to get hurt. So often to talk about the real things, it makes us vulnerable. It makes us in a position where if we don't get the answer that we would like, we'll get hurt. And this is a bit like when you get an email sometimes, or a letter from somewhere, it's not going to be easy, it's going to be a hard issue, and it's very tempting not to open that email. Indeed, my most effective use of email, my effective clearing of the inbox, is when I know there's an email I really don't want to read somewhere down there, because I know it's going to be difficult and it's going to perhaps involve me getting hurt or exposing myself or something else. I clear everything else first. I do the laundry, I do all sorts of things, anything to avoid opening that one thing, anything to avoid that conversation. And so, and it might be because I just asked the question, I almost don't want to see what the answer is, because if it isn't what I want, then I'll be disappointed, I'll be hurt. And the other one is shame. And actually, the first one, the example I can think of that just comes into head actually is there's somebody at work who is really brilliant in many ways, and I often give him the most difficult problems to go and solve, and he'll go and he'll do 99% of the job brilliantly. He'll talk to all the people he needs to talk to. He'll figure out what to do. He'll bring people along and get people to a consensus. The thing he won't do is press send on the email. So he'll do all the work, but he won't press send, because that's all. The rest of it for him is quite easy, actually. He knows he'll get on well with people. He knows he'll do well in meetings. But the bit of pressing send on that last email, of putting it out there so people can really critique what he's done, and that's the bit he doesn't like, because he fears the response. He fears that someone will say, well, that wasn't a very good piece of work, was it? And he doesn't need to, because it's good. And you can tell him that all you like, but it doesn't change it. And then the other one of the shame of well, actually we know we're not. We know we've got weaknesses. We know there's things we don't want people to know. We know that we didn't do that thing very well, and when we get the email back about it, we don't want to open it, because we know it's going to say, hey, you're late on this, and we feel guilty about it. We know we put it off. We know all these things. Or we won't ask for help because we don't want to admit that we're not completely self-contained in what we do. Or we want to ask for help every 15 seconds because we want the assurance that somebody else approves of what we're doing. So how that shame and just I'm not good enough comes into it as well. So all this, most bike shedding, it seems to me, comes down to either we don't want to get hurt or we feel ashamed of ourselves and what we do, and we don't want to put that out there. We don't want to expose that to anybody, least of all God. And so two bits back to our friends David and Moses around that. So with Moses, the people of Israel were at such a state at that point that actually God said to Moses, only you're going to be allowed to see me face to face. And then you're going to have to go back and relay the message to the Israelites. Because if they saw me face to face, they will be destroyed. It will be too much. In the state they're in now, it will be too much for them. And I wonder whether that's why it always feels like there's layer after layer that needs exploring. It's because actually if God told us everything all at once, we wouldn't be able to cope with it. So God is gentle. He comes and he tells us piece by piece and bit by bit, one layer at a time. This is what's next. And David tried. You all know the story of David and Goliath, eh? It's moderately famous that David was this small shepherd boy, Goliath was this 7-foot giant on the other side, the Philistine side, and they were they sent their champions together, and David tried to put all the armour on. He tried to fight with a big sword and with armour, and this is just useless. I can't do this. So eventually he went out in his shepherd's garb with some slingshots, and he just took Goliath out with the slingshot. But I think the message for us is we can put all the armour on we want, but God can only use us when we take off that armour and where we become ourselves, not try to be somebody we're not, try to be a warrior when we're not a warrior. So God knows all these tricks. Like Be Thou My Vision was written in like the 7th century, I think, so that's 1300 years for a start, and there was probably 2000 years before that. God knows these tricks. We're not the first people to have experienced this. He knows, he's gentle, he rescues us from that situation. And so with the what is, well, what are all the things that stop us moving closer to God? What is our armour? What's the things we're ashamed of? What's the things that we don't want to talk about? What do we do now? And in the end, it can be very complicated, or it can be very simple. That when one wants to get to know somebody better, when you want to move in closer to someone, the first step is spend time and spend time with that person or with God, and get to know whether you do like each other. How can you move in closer? Just listen a bit and find out where they're at, and take their invitations to finding out where you're at. So it seemed that that the challenge maybe a little bit is, are we prepared to go up that mountain or start to climb that mountain to move closer to God? Are we prepared to take off armour and to sit down? The challenge I think I would set myself at least is once a day for the next week, 2 weeks, to metaphorically take off armour and just sit down for 3 minutes is the challenge I gave myself, for 3 minutes of quiet and peace and just silence and sitting with God, and invite God to come and be with me, and to ask him, why am I scared? Why am I scared by moving closer in? And let him hold you as you do that, as he held Peter when he tried to walk on water and sank. And I think all the constraints we talked about at the start, the busyness and all these things, they probably won't disappear. Jesus healed some people and removed their constraints, but other people not. And he worked with lots of people with constraints, people who were blind, people who were deaf, people who had no friends, prostitutes, people who were outcasts, and he freed them. And yes, the story is how he healed them to free them, but there's a freeing, I think, that doesn't necessarily need to change constraints. But so that path of moving into God might not change the constraints, but what it might mean is that instead of running round in circles in our little piece and choosing to go round the same circles again, maybe we can run on the whole beach and be unleashed. Amen. And now Mary is going to lead us in our prayers.
Knowing that my voice is very, very well, I'm sort of perched over here. If you can't hear me, wave. Hopefully I'll be looking up. Heavenly Father, we ask your loving presence with us as we come before you today in our prayers. We thank you for your many blessings that you provide us, for this country we live in, for its beauty, and for the freedom we enjoy. We thank you for this church family where we find friendship, acceptance, and support, and where we can share in the joy of worshiping you. We confess we do not always follow you, and we fall short of your best will for us, even as you graciously allow us the freedom to make unwise choices and to move away from your presence. We ask that you get our attention at those times, Lord, when we stray from your guidance, and to draw us close again. Help us to move in close to you, and to move into others who need our attention and love. Open our eyes to see what you would have us do, and how you would have us be. Open our hearts to discern your will for us, and please give us the strength and desire to follow you. I ask also, Lord, that you would open the eyes and the hearts of those particular two powers in our world right now, North Korea and the U.S., that everyone could see their responsibilities and begin to have more love for others. We especially ask your guidance and direction for this parish of St. Mary's. We need to feel your wisdom so we can find the right decisions. All this we ask in your precious